Hi everybody and welcome to the second video about the F4 lines. As I said before, all these F4 lines are relatively new and it's hard to really give them a name. In this video we'll be looking at the version in which white castles queenside, black plays bishop e7 and then white decides to play f4. I guess I will call it a hybrid of the English attack and an f4 variation. But the interesting thing about this line is that I remember checking it also back in 2013 when the line that I showed in the previous video was still giving me quite a headache and I had trouble fixing it. And then during the World Junior Championships where I was supposed to play myself, but in the end I couldn't go due to unfortunate circumstances, I was following the games and a very strong Chinese grandmaster Yu Yangyi, who by now is actually a 2700 player and quite a well-known name, introduced this 9 f4, which led to a very sharp game and a relatively quick draw. But at that point I realized that playing such a new opening, or actually a trendy opening where so many people are analyzing and trying to find new ideas, you have to really stay up to date. And by now that has slowed down a little bit. A lot of new ideas have been found and analyzed already, but when I was playing a lot of tournaments as a professional chess player in 2013, I was all the time trying to keep myself up to date about these lines, and I think on this specific line I had the right conclusions pretty early on. So let's have a look at what I'm gonna suggest for you guys to play here. Well, obviously with the bishop on e7, f4 makes sense, as in the previous video black countered that idea with bishop b4. Now that doesn't make too much sense, as white will play bishop d3 and he gained the full tempo with long castle. So black has to find another way to play. Once again, as I said in many other videos, d6 is really not such a option. It just doesn't fit the style, and I think after something like bishop e2 followed by a quick g4, white is probably better. So the right move to my mind here is the move b5. And I mentioned this move against f4 on the 8th move as well, but here it's a bit more effective. In fact, white has to follow in a similar style as I mentioned there. He's going to play e5 and we're going to counter it with b4. And here white has two serious options. Knight cb5 is the main line, but also e takes f6 is quite a serious move that hasn't been tested as much, but does have some venom in it. So I'm going to start off by showing that to you. E takes f6, b takes c3, queen takes c3, and bishop takes f6. So really this has been an exchange of a piece and a pawn, but as we can see, white's influence in the center is still quite strong, and he follows up with g4 here, trying to play g5, and of course we don't want to take on d4 with our bishop. So logically we play h6 here, which makes g5 not as attractive, as we can take and play bishop e5 now. And after h4, which is the main move, after any other move you can look it up once again, but I suggest to play bishop b7. And black generally gets a comfortable position going bishop b7 and rook c8. After h4, however, things are a bit tricky, as white opens up this second rank for his rook to get into the game. So bishop b7, rook h2 is the idea. And after queen, and this is actually a critical position in which I think I found a pretty nice, not sure if it's a new idea, but it's definitely a strong idea, which is queen d6. Initially I've always wanted to play rook c8 in this position, but as I said before, this rook is doing a good job not only getting to d2 eventually, but also protecting the c-pawn. So this enables white to play queen d2. And after the moves knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, takes on d4, queen takes d4, castles, I agreed that this doesn't look like too much for white, but I find it a little bit unpleasant, as for example after bishop d3, a5, a3, white can eventually think about playing g5 and g6. Also h5 and g5 is an idea, and I just feel that in a position like this even, white is planning to play f5. Uh, White is playing for two results in a way. I really don't see what can go wrong for him. I think the endgames are a bit better as he has a potential past b pawn, and also his attacking potential is a little bit better as the b2 and c2 pawns are very, very well protected. So I don't like this position, and instead, like I said, queen d6 looks like a very strong idea to me. The idea is to take on d4 as soon as possible when white has some difficulties protecting his f-pawn. So queen d2 would be the logical move. But after a mass exchange here, my king is still in the center, which makes a big difference. As now I'll just play king e7, and I think the endgame is a lot more bearable, in fact just equal in this situation. For example, white wouldn't have a very nice square, but white doesn't have a very nice square on d6 to put his rook with the king on e7, because there's always bishop d5 to be taken account of. And yeah, this is just a very reasonable equal position where you can actually still outplay your opponent, as these central pawns also might start running one day. For example, f6 e5 is a plan. So queen d6 is a nice little move to remember. And that brings us to white's main move, which is knight c b5. So this is very sharp. White voluntarily opens up the a file, which is of course quite a risky strategy, but he gets some very heavy influence on the dark squares over here in return with a knight on b5. So obviously black has to take queen, and here I want to suggest queen b8. Queen a5 has also been played, I believe. It just once again, as I said in the king b1, 10 king b1 video on the English attack, I don't like to show variations or actually play them where I have to remember a lot of forced lines in order to make a draw or to even get a reasonable position, and I have the feeling this is one of those examples once again. After something like e takes f6, g takes f6, knight d6 check, this is the theory. White goes rook d3, and here there are some crazy lines. I don't even remember exactly, but it has to see something with check, and now either queen b1 or queen takes b2. There are all sorts of subtleties, but at the same time it's pretty obvious that white has very serious compensation for what's happening on the queen side with the bishop going to c5 or b6, and black's position just really doesn't appeal to me. So instead I'm gonna suggest queen b8, which I think is still a very viable alternative and gives black a lot more natural play as well. So after e takes f6, g takes f6, the main move is king b1. Knight d6 now doesn't make too much sense because black can just change the queens when obviously the weakness of those dark squares isn't as serious, and also he immediately gets a pawn up. So after the following line, rook a5 with the idea of knight e7, knight f5, kicking out that rook, I think black's doing pretty well. You can check once again all of these lines in the ebook. So g takes f6, king b1 is really what should be white's point here. Now we play d5, stopping that knight d6 idea, and obviously it's always good to have a pawn in the center. Here white has a few options. One of them is c4, b takes c3, queen takes c3, bishop d7, bishop c5, and it is in fact the game where that I was referring to when I introduced this line. This is the game of Yu Yangyi against Jorge Cory, who are both at the time were both very strong young players. They still are, in fact. They're both young grandmasters, and actually that game finished in a quick draw after the following moves. Queen g3 check. Short castle was a good move here that he found over the board, and white decided to play queen h4 as he didn't, clearly exchanging these pieces didn't appeal to him, as black just has all these open files and very big attacking potential, whereas white might hope to make it perpetual here, but maybe black can even protect that with the knight or something in that direction. There was definitely not a lot of point for white to take that risk, and after queen h4 the game ended in a perpetual check. So c4 is not really something to be scared of, it's actually just white trying to force the draw. Instead, the move queen f2 is a bit more tricky, but after bishop a6, once again white is having some problems with these two active heavy pieces, and in fact the only way to really do something here is to move bishop b6. I think after knight d4 black is already a tiny bit better in the following position. Once again, this a2 pawn is just a very nice target for the future. And also, as we saw in another line, sometimes the king can come to d7 in order to connect the rooks. After bishop b6, this is actually quite an important moment to remember your lines. Here black has a very unnatural move, but it's by far the best. Bishop takes b5. Maybe not too unnatural. Obviously knight c7 check was threatened, and playing something like king f8 it doesn't appeal too much either, but still it's a very serious decision to give up your bishop for that knight and immediately fall under a pin. But it works out fine for black. After bishop takes b5, queen b7. Rook b8 is immediately threatened, so white has to deal with that, and he cannot keep his bishops on those active squares just like that. Several moves are possible here. I think the most serious one is probably something like c4, although c4 also doesn't really work. After taking, rook c1, rook b8, rook takes c3, queen takes b6. Pretty much black is forcing the queens to be traded, and in the following endgame I even slightly prefer black, who has these nice central pawns that are also placed on white squares, which means that it limits the activity of white's bishop. Probably another one is going to follow on f5 if white doesn't stop that, and at the same time it will be hard for white to push these pawns very far with the other rook being activated soon, and probably ending on b8 or maybe on the a file. Let me see. Another move here for white would be some natural move like rook e1. Maybe that's actually advisable compared to the previous move, but after something like rook b8, takes on c6, queen takes c6, bishop d4, it's a pretty good idea to come back to the a file where the rook is actually more active and only had a temporary function on b8. And after something like b3, I like the move king d7, bringing in this rook, maybe actually doubling it immediately, and just an unclear position where both results are possible, but black can definitely be happy about the outcome of the opening. So actually this position is sort of the key position that you should remember. Once you're here, you're pretty much in safe territory. I never looked at the 9 f4 line as much as a dangerous weapon as the 8 f4, which was really something that bugged me and many other Taimanov players for a while. But this one was solved reasonably fast and easily. But it's still good to know about it, and like I said, remember this position, you'll be fine. Next on, we're going to look at the original f4, which is going to be the 6th move f4. Thank you for watching.